and we will be doing a light chat. I don't get the Choons part. Can you
Choons?
explain that?
So DJ's going to send you music.
Sorry, I didn't get the Choons. Sorry, I missed that part. Anyway, so Helen Keegan and her friends, each one of you please do introduce yourself when you start talking so people know who you are, and it'll go live tomorrow morning. So, Helen.
Good morning. Very pleased to be here. For those of you who don't know me, I run the Heroes of the Mobile Fringe Festival, which is on this week, and a big party of Swedish beers on Wednesday night. So if you haven't been to that before, check it out at swedishbeers.org, and all the festival events are at mobileheroes.net. So Rosa, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Hi everybody, I'm Rosa. I work from Fitbit, and I'm based in Barcelona, so I help my friends running this festival, and I'm Swedish beer, so come please. And Suji.
I like this part.
Yeah.
I'm Suji Nosa. We are in Casa Nosa. Welcome home, everyone. That's all. Welcome home, Barcelona.
Thanks, Suji. My name is Carlo Longino. I work for a company called WIP, W-I-P. We organize a number of developer events here. Come to our party before you go to Swedish Beers on Wednesday night. I'm not saying you have to go to one or the other, but you should come to WIP.org for more details.
Hi, I'm Rafe Blandford. I'm a mobile strategist at DigitasLBi, it's a big technology marketing agency in London. I'm probably also known for the websites I run, which is allaboutwindowsphone.com, and before that, allaboutSymbian.com.
All about what?
All about Symbian, thank you, Carlo. And also do some mobile podcasting at 361podcast.com.
Oh, and hello, my name is Kirsta Styles. I'm a tech journalist, mobile specialist, and now a senior reporter at TechCityNews, covering the conference. Okay,
guys. So I don't know where we should start, but how about what do you see forecast about MWC? What are the hot topics for this year, in general, and what do you think will be seen?
So in general, I think there's going to be wearables, big data, advertising, analytics. Those are the big ones for me. Also health and automotive, but that's not kind of my specialist area. But analytics, a lot of analytics companies.
I can talk about on the device perspective. I think we're going to see more in the mid-tier. There'll be the usual big announcements, but if I'm looking for broader themes, it would be personalisation, seeing more of that in software and services, and as Helen says, kind of the idea that mobile's eating everything else, and so extending into health, cars, retail, that idea of the kind of Internet of Things being controlled from a mobile device. So I expect to hear a lot more about that this year.
Yeah, I'd agree with both of those. I think in terms of wearables and Internet of Things, a lot of what we're going to be seeing is more how those integrate with devices and handsets, and how some of the bigger players in devices, thinking companies like Sony with their LifeLog API and LifeLog, that's right, isn't it? Yeah, LifeLog API and things like that, seek to integrate outside devices and services into their own ecosystem, and did you just cringe at my use of the word ecosystem?
I'm doing buzzword bingo.
I sort of cringed inside, but I was at CES in January and spent some time on the show floor in the area of wearables and fitness trackers and things like that, and there was a tremendous amount of junk, in addition to some of the bigger names with better devices and more comprehensive services. And so I think there's still a lot of clearing out to be done in that sector. But I think we're starting to hit a point where, again, the integration of those things into other services and with other devices is going to be big this year.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, and I should see in this Mobile World Congress what is next after the devices. So what happened with this data and what can we do with this data and improve the management of the data and how to improve our life with these devices.
So I see a switch, I don't know if it's correct, more into enterprise stuff. Up to now there was a lot of startups with B2C. There are startups with B2C still, but I think the conversation has shifted more as to what enterprises are going to be doing. Are they going to be integrating all the data produced or sensors and whatever? I did 2 interviews yesterday and that was the conversation. What are your opinions on that?
Certainly I'm seeing more enterprise type companies signing up to come to my events. So there's definitely a conversation there. And I think some of the demos this afternoon at Innovation on the Fringe will be enterprise related rather than consumer startup oriented. So I think it's a good thing. It has to happen. The world has gone mobile. And it's a time for these companies to catch up if they haven't already been part of the party, as it were.
Yeah, I think something that I've noticed over the last few years at MWC is a lot of the consumer companies, like you mentioned, whether it's startups or even handset vendors, the role that they're taking is changing. This used to be a very consumer product-driven show with a lot of big handset announcements and things like that. You're not seeing quite as much of that. You still see some of it. Like I think Samsung has big announcements tomorrow. Microsoft will announce some things. But for instance, HTC did their big unveil last week or earlier this week. But they have people locked up under NDA, maybe. But it's just like with a lot of other things. There's so much noise here. It's difficult, I think, for these companies to stand out, and especially if you're a small startup. Being able to make an impact on a scale that's really going to get you noticed is incredibly difficult here. And then you add in the sort of expense and complexity of doing activities at Mobile World Congress, and it becomes a lot harder for people that aren't large enterprises. So I think that's a lot of it.
Mm-hmm. Rafe?
Yeah, I think that's a trend we've been seeing recently. The consumer stuff in terms of announcements is all going to happen on Sunday and Monday. It kind of leaves the rest of the week for some of the more enterprise-focused things, but I also think it's a natural part of the industry as it matures. There's an acknowledgement that building businesses off an enterprise model is easier simply because these are the companies that have the money to invest over a longer-term timescale. It's actually more predictable as well, and so companies looking to go into revenue straight away rather than sort of build themselves up to then being sold on. I think of looking at the enterprise space, and it's just really a reflection of the scale now. The smartphones have got to the point where they are in most enterprise users' hands. Previously it was very consumer-led, but the rise of bring your own device plus enterprise deployments where they happen mean, I would have said that it's probably getting to the point where 80% of workers in any given company will have a smartphone, and of course it therefore makes sense to look to the efficiencies that mobile can bring.
So, Rafe, what would you, let's say you were in a room with a lot of developers, 100 in there, and you were supposed to give them guidance as to what they should be working on, or for whom they should be working, and which field, mobile, there's Internet of Things. What would you suggest, like, your money depended on that? What would be your best advice to give them, hey guys, this is what you
No
should be
pressure.
working on?
No pressure at all.
So I think this is a question that's better for Carlo, but I'll take a shot anyway.
I'll take it from all of you. I need an answer from all of you.
I don't actually think you should see mobile as something different. I think it's actually part of everything else. Too often people talk about it as a channel or an individual project. It really needs to become an integral part of your business, and therefore developers should look at the businesses they know best and see how mobile innovation can be applied to them, and that would be my advice. If you're someone who's a very experienced mobile developer, if I was going to say one space that's going to be very hot in the next few years, I think health would probably be the one I'd pick out. It's going to be very difficult to navigate because of the regulatory environment and framework, but in terms of the margins there, you only need to look at the rest of the health industry to realise there's a lot of potential there. So that's probably the one area I would advise people to look at, and I'd say use a direct-to-business model rather than consumer because it's just easier.
Yeah, I think Rafe makes a good point in a way when he sort of punted on the question by saying, rather than a specific area, pick something and that you know well and solve a problem there. And I think really that's probably the best way to answer this question. There is no sort of magic bullet. The formula is going to be the same in any space where you need to find an inefficiency, you need to find a problem, and you need to solve it, and you need to do it in a way that is easy for users and brings them some value. So again, like Rafe said, the best advice is to find a business space or a vertical that you know, or one that you can get to know very well, and apply some technology to it. Blending that technological expertise with the knowledge of the business. In terms of particular areas that I think are interesting, health is one. I'm not quite as bullish on it as Rafe is, maybe just because of, like he mentioned, it's a very difficult one to get into. But I think there are a lot of of other ones, such as transport and logistics. There's still huge opportunities there for developers and third-party services. I think still looking at some of the Salesforce automation and some of those things that are available. And particularly too, I think there's some interesting opportunities in wearables there. People tend to look at wearables and smartwatches strictly from that consumer perspective, where it's saying, oh, it's a smartwatch, I want to get my messaging notifications on it or something like that. But if you think in the context of, say, transport and logistics, you have a company that has a fleet of truck drivers who they want to send messages to or things like that. It's great to send those things to a phone, but in most places now, drivers aren't supposed to be using their phones while they drive. Maybe they shouldn't be using their smartwatch either. But if you think in terms of just sending a notification that can at least say, hey, pull over, check your phone for a message. You need to go to a different place. You need to change your route. There are some things like that, as opposed to yet another sort of step counting application or something like that.
It's hard to disagree with either Carlo or Rafe on that, I would say. My advice to developers would be try and solve a bigger problem. So whatever problem you're thinking you're solving, maybe think bigger, because I'm seeing so many startups, certainly in the London scene, and I'm thinking, really? You're doing that? And, do we really need another app for that when there's already 100 apps that do that, and yours doesn't look much better, different, cheaper, whatever.
Can you just clarify a little what you mean by solve a bigger problem? Because Rafe over here took a really deep breath.
Yes, you're right.
So that makes me think he's ready to launch across the table.
I'm just sick of, yet another booking app for something, or yet another dating app for something. And I'd just like to see some deeper thinking about what to build in the first place and what problem to solve in the first place. And I think part of that is thinking a little bit bigger.
Yeah, I think that's excellent advice. I'd also add to that, I think sometimes when you see these kind of cloned products, it's absolutely right. The advice would be look for adjacent product sectors and kind of replicate that model. But on the other hand, I'd also advise developers to think smaller. Quite often they're trying to solve too big a problem, and actually it's not what Helen meant, but break it down into a smaller challenge. When you think about a problem, it's generally got a subset of problems, identify one of those subsets and then do experiments around that. And often a single piece of innovation there can build your entire business off that, rather than trying to do everything at once. And that's one of the great things about mobile. It can be relatively bite-sized and make a big difference, a big impact. When you think of some of the most famous disruptive mobile companies, things like Uber and Halo are actually basically just solving the problem of sticking your hand up in the air in a virtual way, and it's not a lot more complicated than that.
Yeah, I mean, the taxi app phenomenon in London is quite incredible, considering that you can get I can get on my bike, you can get a Boris bike, you can get on the bus, you can get on the tube, overground, underground train. So I have to agree there. I mean, I think it's something I mean, extending this a little bit further, it's perhaps a diversity issue. You know, you've got a lot of people sitting around the table who are all kind of from quite similar backgrounds, who probably have the same problems, like, oh, how annoying it is having to put my hand up to get a taxi. So I think this, not that it's necessarily an easy problem to solve or something for developers to solve necessarily, but you know, a diversity of voices, experiences, and therefore problems, I think is something that is certainly something that we need to talk about if we want to start solving bigger problems. To kind of build on the mHealth idea, I think assistive technologies for people living with all sorts of different disabilities and health problems, I think are something that shouldn't necessarily be a lucrative area, but something where mobile can potentially start saving people's lives, and actually looking over to developing countries as more people get online, and you know, seeing how mobile can help people with you know, growing crops or you know, starting small businesses, things like that. I think that's the kind of stuff that I'd really start like to see more of.
Just to go back to, I guess, my 3 fellow panelists' points. Those are, you know, those are all interesting things. And I think just to follow a little bit what Rafe was saying, you know, in terms of looking small, I think, you know, if you want to break that down into some practical advice for a developer, I think that means start with doing something well, doing one thing well and starting from there, and then figuring out other things to do. But then in terms of thinking of on a bigger scale of you know, along the lines of what Kirsta and Helen are saying, I think we see a tendency of a lot of people to lead their business ideas with a service or an application, where a lot of times, you know, those services or applications, you know, are just specific implementations of a technology. So if we use the example of Uber, like Rafe mentioned, for instance, they've just launched this Uber Eats service here in Barcelona, where instead of using Uber to get a ride from a place, they're doing food delivery. You know, so
Yeah, because it's really hard to get good food in Barcelona.
I'm not going to argue that. But still, I mean, I can see, you know, there are plenty of places around the world that deliver food that, you know, would argue it's a successful business, you know. And so I think that, you know, by using Uber sort of as a delivery platform, whether they're delivering people from place to place, or whether they're delivering food, or whether they're delivering packages, or whatever the case may be, you know, that's sort of the platform thinking, and then delivering the people is an application of that. And so I think, you know, a lot of people tend to build businesses that are, I don't know, dating sites, or you know, something else. My mind is sort of slipping, of a common application, like a flight tracking application, for instance, you know. We don't necessarily need more of those, but there can be some technology behind those that can be applied in other places. And I think Kirsta raises a really interesting example of seeing things in emerging markets where, you know, historically there's been technology leadership coming from those places, like mobile banking. The most successful mobile banking applications have all come from emerging markets. And then, you know, the rest of us in the developed world are finally sort of figuring out, hey, there's some actual good stuff happening here. You know, and so I think that's the sort of, to my mind at least, the marriage of this large and small thinking that my fellow panelists here are talking about.
Yeah, as a former app developer, I used to copy good models, and that was my mistake, I think. It works and you shouldn't reply it, so you should improve and have your niche. But it's difficult in the south of Europe, I think, to have something new, because we don't have the background and the power to develop something big. So we have these apps or these service things, and we should make more implementation, technological implementation, I think.
Well, to talk a little bit about on the side of the startups, I think media has also done a bit of damage, because B2C usually get a lot of coverage.
Yeah.
And I know that because we always try to find B2B, and nobody really cares to hear what they don't understand. So how they're going to cover it? So I, in my opinion, they're doing it.
I agree with you, because media is always on the fashion side of these things. So they cover the B2C. It's like Uber in Spain. They have a great lunch, but no worries is much about logistics. It's not fashion at all, so they didn't cover.
Yeah.
And it's a great market because we are in the south, so we have a logistic power here, and we should implement this one. But yesterday we were talking about we don't have the education, could we say, to implement B2B, either the developers, not the media, either the developers, I think.
But maybe that's why, in my opinion, we have to bring in the old people, as I say. I mean, meaning experienced in other fields that don't know technology, because there's still a big gap that I see in the middle. I come across a lot of professionals that are very good at what they do, but they have no idea how to collaborate with people in technology, and there's issues there. So I don't know if you have something on that.
Yeah, I definitely think you need people to do some translation and to bring people together, and because we've been used to working in silos, so the techies work in their technical department and the marketing people are over there and the salespeople are doing their sales thing, and sometimes they talk together on a Friday night over a beer and maybe they don't. And that can lead to all sorts of complications. And the world is getting more technology oriented, but it's really complicated. And I recently did a research project for a client around programmatic advertising. Oh my goodness, and I know about this stuff. I'm not coming to this clueless, and I'm looking at the market going, I'm really glad I don't have to buy any of these services, because I just could not differentiate between most of the different companies there, what they might be doing, why one technology would be better than another, and acronyms, I know what they mean, and then you forget instantly what they mean. And so we need ways to make this stuff more accessible for ordinary people who aren't programmers to be able to contribute to the story and to the picture and to help create these services. Because that way we'll get things that more people can use and be more practical and not have jargon.
Carlo?
I think that's an interesting point. I mean, even just beyond the sort of business aspect of it, I mean, I think the bigger backdrop that we're starting to see, are things like If This Then That. We've just come out with a new app for Android that lets people sort of create code and create their own applications without creating code or applications. It's, for people who aren't familiar with it, it's ifttt.com, and you can basically set up different services to interact with each other when certain things happen. It's interesting. And then of course, the whole maker phenomenon in the hardware space, where the prototyping and creation of hardware is really becoming democratized in a sense. People able to build things with Arduinos or other types of boards and very easily build in all other sorts of sensors. And so I think we're getting to a point where this sort of technology creation really is going mainstream. And I think that's going to be really interesting to see over the next few years as well. And I think just in the context of Mobile World Congress this week, we might see some of that too, from companies like Intel, MediaTek, some other people like that.
Rafe?
My observation would be that technologists in general think they know best about everything, and as a result they tend to think they can run other businesses better than the people running them themselves, and that's pretty much always a mistake. And I think that arrogance has infected mobile to a certain extent. And while that's not necessarily an enormous problem, you can also put it the other way around. The scale of mobile as we head towards 2 billion smartphones is pretty unique, and so both sides have a lot to learn about what that means, because essentially mobile is becoming the digital infrastructure on an unprecedented scale, and no other consumer electronics or business side thing has actually ever reached that. And so the lessons we have to learn, both in the Western markets, in particular I think in the emerging markets, are profound. So as to what Carlo was saying, yeah, absolutely, it is becoming a lot more democratized in the access to that kind of thing. And I think the other problem is a lot of companies, particularly ones that have been around more than 10 or 20 years, aren't set up with a structure to address technology, and particularly mobile technology. They tend to operate in very distinct departments. And what mobile does essentially is make digital accessible everywhere at any time. And suddenly that means that you don't think about marketing at one particular point in time, you think about it all the time on the customer journey, and that will apply to